Well, hello, I'm Johanna Derlega. Thanks so much to Lenfest for inviting me. And I think this is my third time. I love it so much. And it is so wonderful to see all of you participate today. I'm gonna do what I'm hoping to be a somewhat quick deck. And then please do just ask questions as I go along. Yossi's gonna help me see them and let me know if there are some questions. He'll just interrupt me, and then I'll leave a lot of time at the end for Q&A because I actually think that's
Let's let's see lunch, Madeline.
where a lot of the
Estás
meat comes
comiendo
from.
costillitas.
So let me just see here. There we go. So the 19th launched in 2020, right before the pandemic as a nonprofit news organization. And our mission is to cover politics and policy through the lens of women and LGBTQ people. It's obviously a population that has historically been underrepresented in the news. And we cover policymakers, of course, but also the people that policy impacts, which I think is a real differentiation in the politics and policy news space. So we launched with a lot of interest in 2020 in sponsorships and advertising, but obviously there have been many challenges to that. Some are industry-wide, things like the pandemic and global unrest and economic uncertainty. And then there are some challenges that are unique to us, but also some other small news organizations. You know, we don't create commodity content that drives scale. That's something that I think the market has come to value. And we also don't offer customized opportunities, things that are really expensive to produce and need a scaled audience, like sponsored content, which is a popular, again, valued product in the market. So, we had actually a pretty amazing year in 2021 from a corporate sponsorship standpoint, and a decent one at the beginning of 2022. And then we started seeing a drop. We're overall in a very good economic position because we have philanthropy. We're a nonprofit news organization, but we are a diversified revenue model, and we feel that it is very important for us to work on growing revenue that is earned. So my background, I actually worked in for-profit Beltway media for almost 20 years before joining the 19th. I ran sponsorships, advertising, events, ad ops, marketing at The Hill and National Journal. And I feel that that is mission-based work for me. I always have. But I left media in 2018 because I felt that the industry was no longer really serving an audience. And then I couldn't pass up the opportunity to leave a consultancy that I had started to join the 19th because of its focus on this unique audience. So last month, I returned to consulting and coaching work. But the 19th is still a client. It's actually my foundational client. So I will continue to work closely with them. So let me show you a little bit about the timeline. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Hold on one second. There's a little delay here. There we go. The timeline that led to my Sulzberger project. So after a tough year in 2020, when we launched, we had, again, a year and a half of really robust growth. We sold very basic event sponsorships, site ads, newsletter. We basically continue to sell all digital on a weekly basis, not on a CPM, cost per thousand basis, to offset the need to publish for traffic's sake, and also for ease of execution, the execution burden on a very small team, which is basically just me. So by 2022, we were seeing a drop in corporate sponsorships. And I decided at that point to launch a program for 2023 called the Corporate Supporter Program. It was going to include digital and event sponsorships, kind of. Oh, I'm so sorry. Was I muted?
Yeah, I muted you by accident. Sorry about
Oh,
that.
got it. Did you just did I just cut out or?
Yes, you were talking about what was happening going into 2022, I believe.
Okay, that's great. So at the point of 2022, I basically created a sponsorship opportunity for 2023. It was going to be an annual corporate supporter. It was kind of taking the foundation approach to supporting the 19th. And I went out into the market. It was mostly opportunities that I already had, but repackaging them at a higher rate. And I did like 30 plus interviews, and at the end, we got no takers. So I realized that I needed to try something new. So I applied to the Sulzberger Fellowship to explore basically new corporate revenue models, a new approach to doing it. I just want to say that, it's based on design thinking, and I am still a student of this. So I'm going to impart as much knowledge as I have on this really extraordinary program, but I am still a student. So the Sulzberger program, as I mentioned, is based on design thinking, which is, they call it human-centered and prototype-driven. So what does that mean? In layman's terms, it really means that the richness in the program is in getting user feedback around their needs, and then creating prototypes to continually shift and adapt the offering. This is what they call failing fast. It means that if you can put kind of a prototype of a product in front of them, they can tell you immediately whether it's going to serve their needs or not. It's an iterative process. And, you keep iterating until you have a strong product that reduces risk. And there's immense value in that. But I also think that there's other immense value in this process because it provides perspective through space and pauses and reflection and listening. And I honestly think that we spend most of our time in at work, basically doing things like checking things off our list and stemming crises and messaging on Slack, all these things that we're not really giving ourselves the gift of perspective and space. So as I walk through this project and as you check out the workbook, know that maybe there are some things in there that you don't necessarily have to do the entire process, where that's obviously huge value. Are there other ways that you can lift up and gain perspective in this process? So I ultimately did 27 expert and user interviews. That's a lot. You don't have to do that many, but I actually really love this process. And I feel like I got a lot of potential products because I was talking to so many people. At this early moment in this process, in this design review process, I'm not going to them to sell something. This is a big difference from that corporate supporter program I tried to launch in 2022, right? It was me taking something out that was already built. This is very different. This is me going and talking to people very generally about what are their needs, what are their beliefs, their feelings, stories about what is missing in the market or what they're finding in the market that they find value in. And so I kept it very broad at the beginning. I got their initial feedback to help me understand later how we can find solutions and create prototypes. And so, as you can see from all of these people I talked to, it was potential users and users like our current advertisers or sponsors. It includes experts. And also, importantly, it includes my senior leadership team at the 19th, because I can't build or execute a product without all of their buy-in. Okay. So Shannon asks about getting people to take meetings. So I really started, obviously, I've been doing this for a really long time. I have a lot of close relationships with people, and that's where I started. At the beginning, I started with kind of my closest contacts, some people at agencies. But then I started getting bolder. Actually, people really wanted to talk about their needs. I was surprised at how willing they were to take 15 or 20 minutes with me. And then I started reaching out cold. I mean, actually, Lily Zhang, who is this DEI expert who charges, I don't even know how much. I did this. I went to their website. I filled out this this form. Their PR people reached out to me, and I said, "Oh, I'm not looking for services. I can't pay anything." And I got 30 minutes with them. So I do think that actually when you ask for help, when you ask for feedback, you know, these are people who want to inform a product because it's going to better serve their needs. So I actually, again, started, you know, less brave with my closest contacts. And then I went from there. I got bolder and bolder as I went along. So here is the initial feedback. You know, this is not the feedback from later. We can talk about the prototype feedback later, but this is the initial feedback that I found. So executives want to highlight themselves and their companies to influential audiences. They consider the 19th to have an influential audience, even though it is not a huge audience. But logo presence doesn't do that. They want a place to imprint. Most importantly, the 19th is still a new organization, and we are not well known to marketing and communication decision makers who have budget to spend. And when the economy is tight, I was told that they're going to spend less money and they're going to go to the people, the organizations, the sponsorship opportunities that have been tested and had proven results. So that's where the squeeze came in for us, right? In 2022, things start looking dire. Even in 2020 when things were looking dire, but then again in 2022. And so that's what I was feeling there. How do we become known? One is business coverage. I heard that a lot. You don't have business coverage. So we're not, you know, our communications and marketing people aren't looking, you know, to earned media. You're not on the radar. And another is like sponsored content, right? Is a deeply relationship oriented sponsorship opportunity that really gets you in front of people. I heard from some of the experts that the most successful media companies who have great sponsorship programs are built off of their mission. Ours is obviously about representation and belonging. And internally, through my interviews internally, there's a lot of concern about the reputational risk of working with the wrong kind of sponsor. So I go through all my interviews. I took the time to organize my data. You know, I found similarities, and I wrote several point of view statements. Now, point of view statements are basically a way to start with the user, right? To humanize a product. And you want to really touch upon their feelings and their needs so that you can then create solutions through a brainstorming exercise afterwards. Based on all of the interviews I did, I chose Brittany. She's a real person, and she works at a very large company, and she runs public policy. Reputation management has always been a huge part of her job, obviously, as running public policy. But increasingly, companies are expected to weigh in on social issues such as diversity and belonging, which obviously fits in with the 19th. She's an intersectional leader. She's passionate about these issues also, and she needs a place to spotlight herself, to raise her profile as an intersectional leader, but also her company. One of the challenges she has is that there are a lot of other people at her organization who do this work. There are people in DEI, there are people in corporate social responsibility and environmental social governance. There are executives who care about this work, and it creates a challenge to communicate externally when you're not aligned internally. So here is the point of view statement. So I start brainstorming a lot of ideas, right? Like, okay, now I'm going to brainstorm. This is where actually it would really benefit to have a group of people to do this with. I did not. And I basically created, as you'll see in the workbook, half sheets. These are, mine are not very pretty, but graphic heavy product opportunities. They're basically on a half sheet of paper. And these are the quick prototypes that you can take to users. So you can see here, I have all sorts of different things. It includes op-eds, which we don't currently do. networking opportunities for our sponsoring organizations with other company leadership, or it could include networking opportunities with our audiences, maybe a certification program where we do a big awards meeting, right? And a big awards event. Or maybe it's I don't know, like a collective or a membership organization where people can connect and talk to others. And then, of course, you know, what I found through the feedback is that people actually do find value in the sponsorship opportunities that I was already offering. But this huge challenge of getting in front of the decision makers was actually a barrier to selling these sponsorships. So, you know, also including some of those sponsorship opportunities. These are just some of my half sheets. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can get feedback, and half sheets are one way to do that, right? Is present this to a user or someone else to get feedback. I chose to use the half sheets internally. This was, for me, I basically reached out to my senior leadership team and got their feedback this way. I felt like the half sheets were really helpful because obviously there's a lot of concern around protecting your editorial, and this gave people a gut reaction, and then we could go deeper into what makes it uncomfortable to you, like which benefits are uncomfortable to you. So I use the half sheets for that. But for external, I actually used a prototype kind of sorting exercise. So what I did with them is I set up additional meetings with these groups of people that I'd already talked to in some cases. In other cases, people who were familiar with us but hadn't bought yet. I went and said, can I get your feedback on a potential new product or products? And for this, basically, I got on the phone. I created this for myself, which was just a spreadsheet. I had every single benefit, and I asked them to rate from 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, on what if they would value these benefits. And I actually found huge amount of context and feedback and examples that deepened my knowledge of what sponsors potentially need. So from all of this feedback, I created a more finalized prototype. It's not done yet, and it's called the Corporate Membership Program. So, you know, it basically is a community of executives doing this kind of work, DEI, reputation management work at their companies. The membership would give them an opportunity to join not just one person, but people from across the organization. So people from CSR or the executive team or DEI or public policy can join. And then we would also include other companies. And so it would basically be a collective of people of their insights. It would include regular events. One idea could be a kickoff at Howard University. We actually have an HBCU oriented fellowship program with Nicole Hannah-Jones, and maybe we kick it off there, right? And have these discussions. One of the things I heard was that DEI people internally are increasingly struggling to make a case for investment in resources internally. So we could do focus groups there and throughout the year to understand how our audiences feel about these companies. And obviously these are people who have elected to do this. We actually sidebar as part of our membership program for people who don't want to make a monetary donation. There are other ways for them to give their time as a donation and become a member of the 19th. And so this can be this is potentially a elect-in opportunity for them. It would include regular events. It would include a Slack channel, and basically creating benefit and value in community. Then, obviously, there are sponsorship add-ons because I was hearing more and more that there was real interest in doing the sponsorships that we already had to offer. But the biggest issue was making sure that we can get in front of the people who are making decisions. Hold on, we've got one more question here. Let's see. Oh, yes, I did. So I actually asked as part of my feedback, like, what membership groups are you in? And what is effective? And, in the prototyping, actually, some of the people said, we don't do memberships anymore. People don't use them. But other people said, it's this, and this that's important. And so, yes, I did do a lot of research based on the feedback that I was getting, but then also I was just looking at like kind of industry membership groups and using those as part of the prototyping for them. So obviously getting on the radar is quite important here. And so the membership allows us to do that. And then we have an opportunity to scale revenue with these sponsorship opportunities. I got some feedback on, basically the prototyping. One opportunity, you'll see that the newsletter here is doing a custom content section. So for instance, some of the prototyping feedback that I got was, you have to have sponsored content, but your site is not big enough to offer that. You don't have a big enough scaled audience. And so I talked to several groups, especially experts, who basically told me we have almost 60,000 people getting our newsletter, and we have a very high open rate that actually we could easily trade out the ad unit there to create a sponsored content box that, based on our specs, the sponsor sends us, right? And that there's value there. There's an opportunity to offer sponsored content, despite the fact that we can't do that on our site. So here's some other findings that we had in addition to needing sponsored content. One is that the corporate membership feels like it's aligned with our mission, that in our coverage, we're already highlighting intersectional leaders in policy in communities. And this is an opportunity to basically create a community around intersectional business leaders. But a big risk here is, do we have permission in this space without a business reporter? Going back to the scaled audience, that's another one. Obviously, the membership is somewhat siloed from that. But at the same time, the sponsored opportunities are where the scaled revenue is. And so we can't ignore the fact that we need to continue working on growing our audience. The biggest was inside the 19th, which is, who do we work with? How do we decide? Because there's huge risk there. And so I had to stop. Because that is so important. It's so foundational and fundamental. And I kind of missed it without the perspective of this program, is realizing that to clear the path, I need to start with corporate guidelines. So my ask of senior leadership at the end of Sulzberger in May was, I think we need corporate guidelines. And the way that I recommended we do this is to create a working group at the 19th, basically sending it out to anyone to join. We ended up having 13 people. I wanted an external moderator so that no one was there to put their thumb on the scale. We really wanted the working group to work through all of the challenges of this. I joined as just a information gatherer, like a information context provider. I was not a participant. I took notes. I helped prep our moderator, who was a board member and who works in PR, but also at his own firm, was dealing with corporate guidelines also, and has gone through this work. And ultimately, we were able to do two surveys. We did 3 conversations, moderated discussions. And we have offered, we basically have draft guidelines. And it looks a little bit like this ultimately. And again, this is going to go to our senior leadership team next month. These draft guidelines, these are our recommendations. And they're basically built based on industry. There are basically 3 different buckets of industries we will not work with, that don't feel mission aligned. That includes tobacco companies and firearms. And then there are these kind of gray area industries that need further discussion. And then there are these okay, fine industries, right? But obviously there are always going to be challenges with that. There are always going to be gray areas. So what we recommended was that there would be a permanent working group, and it would include someone from editorial, would include someone from revenue, someone from senior leadership team, and someone from audience, to basically go through a set of criteria that we've created the framework around, and quickly make decisions on any of those gray area companies. And, ultimately we'll see where this goes, but I think that it really is the first step. And then once I'm done with this, once we get through this part, the next steps are finalizing the guidelines, externally communicating those. And then I think, given the DEI space right now and what's going on politically with DEI and companies, going back and doing a few further interviews. Is this more needed? Does it need to change? Asking those questions, I think, will be very important. And then going internally, do we have the budget to hire a business reporter or a membership director? What are the risks? Are there ways to create a minimum viable product? And then from there, finalizing the product and preparing for sales enablement. And I'll just say one more word here, which is a product should always be a living, breathing thing. Always looking at, is it working? Is it hitting the goals? Is it too cumbersome internally for execution, so that you can make those adjustments? Okay, I'm going to stop talking now and see if anyone has any questions.
I can stop sharing screen also, so we can.
Perfect.
That was great. Thank you for doing that. This is Ryan. I'm from The Record, which is a community news group in the northern Chicago suburbs. I'm the second employee. Curious on your initial outreach to these corporate members, on that email. Tactically, what does that look like? I did see someone else ask the same question, maybe in chat, of, is that a very short, hey, wanted to pick your brain? Is it a brief on the organization and the mission? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it was, and actually I bet I could even share something. So let me take a note here and see if we can add it to this deck. But ultimately, again, I started with people that I knew, who already knew our mission and already knew our work. And I started there. So I didn't have to give a whole lot of background in terms of who we are, what we care about, what we're doing. It was really going out and saying, I'm doing this project, right? I'm looking at new opportunities for 2024, and I really wanted to pick your brain to understand your communications needs. And that was all it was. I mean, it was really quite easy for others. So there were actually a bunch of the experts. I reached out blind. I didn't know them as well. And so I included basically some of the sales language I use as a door opener for sponsorships. I pulled some of that language. And then I included, again, that I'm creating a prototype of a new sponsorship opportunity, and that I would love to get their feedback, based on their market understanding. And that seemed to work really well too.
Johanna, I'm Joe at the Bangor Daily News in Maine, and thank you for this. I wanted to ask a question about when you said you were talking about business reporting and the fact that the 19th doesn't have business reporting, and that might mean that you don't have permission to do sponsorships in that space. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what were the signals in your interviews that taught you about this permission question.
So, more and more as I talk to people, they found value in our sponsorship products, and they found value in our audience. And I was hearing more and more that we just weren't known enough to the decision makers. And I started asking, well, how are organizations known? Like I started feeling like, okay, there's a barrier here for entry. That worked okay when there was a lot of budget to throw around, but then increasingly when there's less budget. And so then and this is where actually that space and perspective and listening, that I think we don't often do when we're selling a product, right? We want to get something done. And in this case, so it's like outputs when you're selling. This was inputs. It was like a different muscle. And so listening and understanding, okay, well, there is a barrier here. They actually find value in what I'm offering, but they're not buying it. So what are the organizations who are effective? How are they getting in front of them? And so I basically just started asking questions. And it started with one person said to me, you know, I believe in you. And we had been working together for years. I mean, they had never bought anything, but she would take my meetings and everything. And she said, but here's what I'm dealing with in post-COVID and in this economic environment is we have a lot of turnover. There have been a lot of layoffs. And so there are constantly new people in these positions. And they're paying attention to the organizations who are covering them. I'm not saying that you need to sell your editorial, but like there's no interest in even you being on the radar because there's no opportunity for earned at all. And so then once she told me that, then I started asking others, do you think we're known to the decision makers? Like what prevents you? And this is later. This was not at the very beginning, right? This is during the prototyping, is starting to get deeper and deeper into the barriers that we were seeing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. And it resonates with some of the conversations that I've had locally as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Joe. That was a great question. I just wanted to point to a couple of questions in the chat from Joel. Were you generating corporate revenue while concurrently working on this? Capacity is always a challenge, and I know it was a challenge at the 19th. So.
I mean, I do think we made a decision, right? Like when I joined the Sulzberger program, we made a decision, the CEO and I, that and it wasn't always easy, that I was continue to sell, right? I continued to sell, but my attention was split. And we knew that last year philanthropy was still strong. I mean, this is the benefit of a diversified business model. And so I could basically take my attention off of some of that work and then pivot to this. I still was selling, but my attention wasn't, I wasn't doing 110% there. I was probably doing 60 to 70, right? So, and the other thing I will say is that this work was a little bit cyclical for me. I feel like my gut would tell me, oh, I haven't done enough of the current sponsorship work. Like I really need to pivot. Like I don't feel good about the fact that I've got an event coming up and I haven't sold a sponsorship yet. So I would put on pause the Sulzberger work, and then I would basically carve out maybe I don't know, like a couple hours over a couple of days and do major outreach, set up a bunch of meetings, and then pivot back to my full-time job, right? So it was like I was definitely juggling, but because I was in the Sulzberger program, there was permission to take my eye off of the immediate ball. And that's not, I realize that is a privilege that not all organizations have.
No, I appreciate you illustrating that. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think the reality is if it's a priority, you just do have to balance it, but hopefully you're diversified enough. My only follow-up is this, you keep saying that a lot of the responses, you're just not well enough known, or, it's just, you're too risky, right? Did you consider like really expanding the type of potential corporate sponsors that you were talking to, or did you have a pretty set, type of archetype that you knew you had to stick with and just really find a solution there? Or did it enter your mind to be like, okay, it's going to take years to build this up. I really have to start broadening potential market opportunities there.
Oh, that is such a good question. So, my background is thought leadership. So which is helpful for a nonprofit news organization, right? I'm not selling people who are selling things to people. I'm selling, opportunities for people to talk broadly about who they are and how they're impacting the community, which again is a bit of a loophole in tax status, right? So that's really helpful. But what I realized was initially, I was going after the people that I had always gone after, which was, government affairs, associations, but they really want to reach federal. And again, a big differentiation for us is that we not only cover policymakers, but the people that policy impacts. That's a long learning curve for people who are really focused on DC. We are not, that's like typically in our top 3, but it's too hard to compete with the politicos and Axioses who can do an event on DEI or on belonging, right? And have this built-in just DC audience. And so I had already started doing that work because I realized that there were still going to be people, especially people that I've known for years in the market, who were going to be willing to work with us and understand the value. But I needed to reach out to new people. And so basically I started with my biggest allies of my historical people that I had worked with and said, who would have budget for this? Who cares about not only DC, right, and policymakers at the state-based or local level, but also civically engaged? 99% of our audience has taken civic action in the last 2 years. That's really valuable to someone. And so I had already done this circuitous, who is this valuable for? And so when I went back and talked to them, yes, it actually, the lens through which I was seeing this was DEI. It's still public policy because there's still some companies who see value in reaching both. But that's what impacted the outcome of the product was these people. And honestly, DEI still struggles with resources. And so they usually have to find people in marketing or public policy who are willing to front some of the money, but at least they start with the value of our organization. They get that.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A couple other questions in chat from Barbara. How did the final product that you ended up offering to corporate customers differ from the type of sponsorship opportunities that were initially struggling to gain traction?
So again, actually, it's not that different. And let me just say that we're now working on corporate guidelines. And so we have not taken this membership product other than some very initial feedback. We have not taken that out broadly to sell it because we need to get the work done of corporate guidelines. But what I found was our sponsorship opportunities didn't have to be that different. I needed to talk about them differently, right? So we always offered, for instance, with event sponsorships, we offer like a sponsor segment. It's clearly marked as sponsor segment. They can produce it. I'm happy to give them insight into what will resonate with our audience, right? Don't talk about yourselves, like interview someone from the community, things like that. But they didn't see that value until I framed it as you can put your intersectional leaders in front of our audience, right? Like this is an opportunity to address our audience through a sponsored segment. And so I had to talk about the offerings differently, but the biggest barrier was get in front of the people who will make these decisions, these higher level communications, marketing, in my case, DEI, people who have budget. And so the membership is almost like an avenue to getting that sponsorship revenue, to become known at these organizations. So the sponsorship opportunities aren't that different. I will say that like sponsored content and newsletter, which we have not executed yet, I think is probably one of the biggest changes that we would offer.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Question from Vicky. You talked about taking something out that is built, but you also mentioned asking what is most needed. Once you recognized a mutual pain point or alignment, what happened next and how did you get to win?
Yeah, so, I had always taken things out that were built. So the Sulzberger Fellowship was really about starting much earlier in the process, which is asking about what's needed. And, that's what this process is. This is how again, I've been doing this now for 23, 24 years. And I often have approached it as, I have a product, will you buy it? That's not totally fair. I like listening to people. I like adapting products, and I have built products over the years. But the Sulzberger, the design thinking approach is, yeah, you go out and you basically ask for all the needs internally. Having those interviews and getting that feedback allowed me to then match what was comfortable for people, right? Based on their gut. Okay, this doesn't feel good. This feels too close to editorial, but this is something we could do. So it is about aligning. It is, but it's instead of going out with a set product. You could potentially, that's what the prototyping is, right? Is going out and saying, here's a half-baked product, what works and what doesn't for you and why. And again, creating those pain points and understanding where the alignment comes in. And I think that is, that's the beauty of creating a product that is long lasting. But I think you'd have to have more than one conversation. I think you need to hear from a bunch of different people and put that together and figure out where the trends are.
Terrific.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Great question. Next question is from Bruce, who writes, I love the idea of asking about civic actions. How did you ask that question? Open-ended or prompts with options for other? And if you use prompts, can you share them?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically what we ask is, which of the following actions have you taken over the last 2 years? And it includes, and again, this is another thing I will include. So one was the email that I sent. I'm going to add that to this deck. So I think that, Yossi, you'll send this out, right? This deck that I used
Yeah,
today?
we'll send it out, but I can wait till after you update
Okay,
it.
yeah, let's do that. And then the other thing I'm going to add is the questions we ask for civic engagement. So we say, which of the following actions have you taken over the last 2 years? Voting, electing, or volunteering for a candidate or a cause. I think donating to a campaign, all of those things. And basically what we do is, like, based on that, we can get to what civic actions people are taking, and then take out the people who've basically do none of the above. And if it's none of the above, and it's like 1% for us.
Excellent. I'm excited to see the prompts. I'm glad we'll be able to share them. Another question from Barbara. At some point then, do you envision taking a fully formed product out, or will it always be purposely half-baked?
Oh, that's such a good, what a existential question. I love it. So no, I want to take a product out. Once we get done with the corporate guidelines, and I think that will actually give our newsroom and our senior leadership team more confidence in creating a product, right? Like, that is so fundamental. I can't believe I didn't do this earlier, but I didn't. So once we do that, then I think I do need to go back, because there have been so many changes in DEI for companies, go back out, talk to what still works, what doesn't, what needs to be adapted. And then it is about taking it out. Now, once you take it out, you need to be checking in and getting feedback. Does this work, right? Externally, does this still work for you? What is not working? What do you need more of? What do you need less of? But then it's also going internally. What's the impact internally on execution? Is it doable? Is this too expensive for what revenue you're bringing in, right? So yes, in some ways, again, this is a living, breathing product. You don't want to be in a situation where you create something and you leave it out there and you don't adapt and change it. So I guess in that way, it's always kind of half-baked, maybe 90%, 95% baked, but then you always want to be able to pull the levers to change things up.
Excellent. Thank you. Great question and great answer. Any other thoughts or questions? I have some, but want to make sure others have a chance to jump in also. Well, I'm so curious that you talked about the working group you're building within the 19th, and that it's really a cross-functional group. And I guess that feels unusual in the sense that folks maybe in the newsroom or the product side are interested in these corporate revenue ideas. And so I suppose, was that a challenge to get buy-in from the newsroom, or what was it like working with folks who maybe this isn't part of their typical day-to-day?
It was so great. They were so engaged. I mean, I think it was really helpful that I was not moderating, that I was just there to provide context, and that we had an external moderator. And he was so thoughtful. I mean, he is a listener, and he allowed for a lot of space for people to air their concerns really openly. And actually, that was kind of the first session, right? You had some revenue people, some audience people, get a, how could you let XYZ sponsor, right? And that's scary for them. And so for them to be able to air their concerns, and editorial to air their concerns, but then also, well, look what the Times does and look who they work with, right? So there was a really wonderful set of conversations, and the surveys were really helpful too. Here's what I learned about this working group. It's applicable for everything. And, right now we're talking about a bunch of different projects at the 19th to kind of get to some solutions, right? There's people are not always seeing eye to eye on things. And a 19th working group where you're bringing in people from across the organization, they have a chance to talk about what their concerns are, but toward something, right? They created draft guidelines at the end. And actually, it's also a really great way of engaging our board members, because based on what the working group is focused on, we can bring in a different board member to moderate those discussions. It's a lot of work for the board member, but I found that the board members really want to engage in a way. And so this is now actually its own template. It's this really exciting, I mean, it was wonderful for the corporate guidelines, and we really did have something at the end of it. But I think that this is a model that we're going to be using moving forward on a lot of different areas where there's not always agreement. And how do we get to some agreement? Because explicit norms are very, very important. And I think as a startup, it's really hard to get there. I mean, people, you're building it while you're riding it. And there it comes a moment where you realize we have to have explicit guidelines. Everyone has to be on the same page. And how do you do that? We, as an organization, are a very collaborative organization. We care very much about equity and diversity and belonging. And this is a way to bring anyone who's interested in having the conversation and being a part of it to participate in this process. So it's actually, it's been a wonderful addition to the 19th culturally.
That's amazing. I imagine you mentioned that because it's a startup, these explicit norms and this framework is important. I imagine it's just as important at legacy organizations where you've been doing things for a long time, just because that's the way they've always been done. So in terms of introducing new practices or revisiting why you do things, that explicitness is important as well. And you mentioned that the working group model is also something that can be applied beyond the corporate space. And I think that's true of the user-centered design framework, which you used as well, which is so versatile and so applicable in terms of putting the users and their needs at the center, whether it's potential sponsors or the people consuming our journalism or even folks working internally.
Yeah, I think that news organizations can forget, right? I mean, there are a lot of smart people at news organizations, and we sometimes forget to go back and ask our audience what they want. I think that there's obviously a real interest in serving an audience after all the years of scale and writing for everyone. So you're almost writing for nobody. There's a re-understanding of value in serving an audience. And I think that this is a way of reaching people and understanding what their needs are. And I think it's very helpful. We also did when I was still there as the chief revenue officer, we did this for stewardship. We started this process. We didn't go through the entire thing, but we started with the interviews, the expert information, going back and talking to our current donors in terms of what they need. How do they stay engaged? What are they looking for? What makes them feel connected? And that was incredibly useful also to making sure that our stewardship program continues to serve.
Excellent. I can keep going with questions, but I want to give anyone else space. If thoughts, questions, concerns, feel free to drop them in the chat, or just speak up or raise your hand. Don't need to turn your video on. We just have a couple minutes left. But the one thing, I guess, last thing, oh, sorry, someone speak up.
I'd love to ask on the heels of that last comment. I was taking notes furiously. Great suggestions on tapping into what makes your audience feel connected and engaged. So any tips or tricks or exercises to tell the group here how you can kind of find that North Star again?
You mean in terms of serving an audience?
Yeah, if you feeling like we all get lost in the big sauce, and you mentioned, who are we writing for again, and who's your audience? So any tips to kind of go inward and go, how do you find that again, and what are exercises one can take?
I think asking the user, asking the audience, right? I mean, you can go in to plan, and actually the workbook has this, right? There's a whole planning section before you even go and start asking the questions. And so that's internal work. But again, I think that the big value here obviously is asking for users, but it's also in listening, creating space, pausing, and letting the feedback be the feedback without you putting your thumb on the scale, right? That is really hard. I mean, certainly from a sales perspective, I always want to listen to figure out where I can adapt my goals into what they're saying, right? But this is a different muscle. This is, I mean, obviously you're going to be thinking about it, but like really following the user, following where the energy is. Like, what are they excited about? What do they not like? What are some, in this case with audience, what are some of your favorite outlets? Why, right? And not trying to push them into a direction, but letting it be its own creature. And then coming back and thinking about it, giving yourself reflection time, giving yourself, especially with a group, if you can, internally, brainstorm time, right? Like, how do you then take all these needs that you're hearing about, and how do you create solutions for those? So it's this, I do think that there's a push-pull, external, internal. And again, I think that quiet and reflection is a really important part of this process. Any process, really.
Terrific. Yeah. In the Q&A, Laura asked if we could share examples of language that gets others to open the door, which I think is the email you mentioned that we'll include.
Yes. I'll just add a slide that has like my already warm relationships, and then one I did for a brand new person and how I open the door. So I'll include that on a slide.
Awesome. And I think we have time for one last question from Christopher. Did you go into the interview process knowing the org's value to the potential user, or did you come to know the value during the ideation and testing time?
Well, the org is the potential user. So in my case, my potential user is the potential sponsor. So I was pretty open-minded about, I think, Christopher, feel free to, maybe I'm not understanding the question exactly. Do you want to hop on?
maybe just a little loud in here. I'm in a coffee shop.
Oh, that's fine.
It's my startups working out of these days. I guess my question is like, so we're getting ready to start a corporate strategy session to as one potential thread of our revenue model, and we're also very new. Only been around for a few years, and we are not well known in the state. We're getting more well known per day. But as I start to go into this process, I really love the idea, the design thinking approach for this to interview. And I guess my question is, how vulnerable were you when you went into the interviews to try to come up with what you feel the value is that you can give to those users? And I know it's a little different. I'm thinking of it as like talking to companies and corporations as our users. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I'm always quite honest, probably to a fault in terms of look, we're looking for I'm looking to prototype this because there's something that is not working currently. So I was quite open and vulnerable about my real desire and need to figure out the sponsorship angle. But ultimately, I asked questions that were really quite broad at the beginning. And those were about what is serving your needs? What are your needs, right? What keeps you up at night thinking about your communications? Like what is worrisome to you? What are some solutions you're currently using? Things like that. But as I got further along in the prototyping, I still kept it pretty open because I wanted them to be able to give me all the information. So when I did the sorting exercise, right, where I asked them based on the benefit 1 to 5, how would you rate this? I didn't talk about our value in it. I just explained, okay, so what about op-eds? What if, as part of this, there was a sponsor section with op-eds from intersectional business leaders? And that was it. And they would say, oh, you know what? We don't really want to talk about ourselves. We really want other people to talk about us. So like this, and this, right? So they would give me a framing. And so I actually think a huge benefit in this is to let go of the sales and just listen. In this process, now there comes a time when there is going to be a sales part of this, but like this is exploratory. This is beginner mind, right? This is, I am here to learn and I am going to get as much information as I can so that I can ultimately apply this to something that could serve their needs. So I don't think that I really wanted to talk about the benefits yet. But eventually I will when I do the sales enablement and go out and sell. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. And I'm wondering, in that process of those interviews, did you learn of new values that you can offer?
Yeah. In fact, one of the people with the corporate membership, when I was talking about some of those values, they said, DEI is being decimated and the executives don't understand how much young, diverse audiences expect companies to be taking a stand here. And we need the information, we need focus groups, we need to understand how audiences feel about this. And so that's when I added the focus group part. Because I was like, I did say, our audience is younger, diverse, people who care about good stewards in the corporate space. But she knew that because she was actually kind of more of a warmer lead. She was one of the people who I'd worked with for years and she had never bought anything. So she did have that sense. But I think in that case, maybe I would have said that, right? Like, oh, well, actually, that is something we could potentially do. And that was of interest.
Terrific. Thank you, Christopher, for that question. And especially thank you, Johanna, for this brilliant presentation and discussion. I learned a ton, and I hope everyone else did also. So thank you for walking us through your process and sharing your expertise. Apologies to everyone that we ran a little bit over, so feel free to jump if you need to. But I put in the chat a link to the workbook, which we'll send around, and also a link to our next session, which is on February 14th about introduction to capital campaigns, which I've learned are more than just asking donors to put their name on buildings. So hopefully that will be of use, and we hope to see you all soon. So thanks so much. Thanks again, Joanna, also.
Thank you.